I was too old, too established, too smart for this kind of love, they said. Still, I stayed put when he fell into my bed that morning. I veered over. Some houses appeared too quiet, but mine had grown used to the stillness. Having lived 51 years had taught me how to fit books, schedules, deadlines into space. I convinced myself it was plenty. I had my coffee, my job, a quiet porch where the wind communicated more than anyone did. To be honest, though, there were evenings when I stayed awake staring at the ceiling and wondering when I stopped feeling touched. Not physically, certainly, although that also. Rather, emotionally, spiritually, as none had truly seen me in a very long, long time. I convinced myself then that it was only practical when I put the tenant's ad. The extra room was useless, hence a small extra rent was never a bad idea. I had not been looking for company. I looked absolutely nowhere for anything. And then he turned up one Saturday early. His name was Liam, 24, a just graduated photographer. His cool, sharp eyes seemed to suggest that he was already mentally framing the event. In his approach, he was courteous, soft-spoken, and unexpectedly gentle. When I initially opened the door and saw him standing there clutching a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, I felt a flutter I could identify. Maybe all it was anxiety. Maybe it was the sudden reality of someone intruding my quiet planet. I walked him around the house, pointing out the kitchen, living room, and guest bathroom. Just nodded, grinned, asked whether he could help carry anything. He spoke very little. I sent him down. He moved in the same day, and my house sensed just that. Not louder, not chaotic, just warmer, as someone had opened a window I knew to be closed. It was little events at first. Every night he made mint or jasmine tea. Then I realized I was doing the same. Our calendars matched each other as we had planned. Every now and then we would run across each other in the kitchen, laugh at nothing, and then return to our corners like polite strangers. Still, I did observe. Not in the wide-eyed adolescent way, but in a quiet, deliberate manner as though he were intrigued about the life behind my eyes. I noted his attitude towards me, and I started to ask, had anyone in years looked at me like that? One evening, after a long bath, I came downstairs wearing a robe loosely and hair still wet. On his laptop editing photos, he was at the kitchen counter. I said, looking half ashamed, half teasing. Looking up, he said absolutely nothing. He just stared at me, truly looked at. His eyes stayed mine for almost more than they should have. Just awake, not driven nor bold, present. And I felt it, strange thrum under my flesh. I reminded myself it was nothing, just a young man behaving respectfully. That evening I went to bed early, but I couldn't fall asleep. Heart gently thumping, I closed my eyes and mumbled, "What are you doing, Samantha?" Into the darkness, keeping hearing the kettle, his fingers on the keys, and the way his eyes stayed on me. The days blurred, but our rhythm steadied. He was respectful, quiet, always eager to help. One time he stepped in and offered to help me assemble the bookcase I had ordered online. Though I said I was good, he stayed. He knelt close by, our shoulders brushing. His hand guided me to the screws warm and steady. We laughed when we stammered. He leaned forward and I could almost feel his breath on my neck. I'm not clear what we covered. I just recall the air separating us. It was thick with something I could not name, or maybe did not want to. I started to notice how my movement about my own house changed in reaction to his presence. I would linger a little more in the kitchen. I would give brushing my hair more time. I would check one once more, this time on my shoulders, how my robe rested. I told myself that was absurd. He lived here only as a tenant, Actually, a lad. Still, one rainy afternoon he dropped by my door. He said, "Can I ask you something?" One nodded. He asked whether he might take some shots of me for a lighting project. I stopped, then turned to meet him. His eyes lacked demand for anything. They were hopeful yet asked questions. I nodded in accord. I wore a plain tank shirt, no makeup, and a loose hair tie. Perched close to the window, the exquisite gray light washed across my face. He just clicked. He said little, merely clicked once more, and I felt not like a woman past her prime for the first time in years. I felt a story worth publishing. I lifted my head between blows and something changed. His viewpoint changed, and he looked not like my tenant for a little moment. He seemed to be someone who saw something in me I would have missed. Though I had no idea what was happening, I felt something gently, delightfully touched inside of me had occurred. I couldn't undo anything either now. Not supposed to be a story was this. It really amounted to a renting agreement. But I started to ask, was I the one being invited in progressively? Have you ever gone through something in apparently daily life that appeared unusual? If this story speaks to you, kindly like this video, subscribe, and click the bell sign. You want not to miss what is to come. Two people trying to ignore the truth are creating a strange kind of silence. It isn't void. It is full of missed stares, words not said, almost but never quite occurring gestures. That developed into what it was with Liam. Long and almost lingering almost. We shared one flat and breathed the same air. Still, every minute that passed seemed like something just waiting to happen between us. I told myself I was dreaming, that I was romanticizing a boy's politeness, that it was loneliness acting dress up as desire. The small things eventually started to feel like signals, though. One morning as he opened the door, I passed the toilet. He wore a towel knotted around his waist and dryses still glistening on his collarbone. He had no clothes. He stopped, turned to face me, then grinned, a slow, silent smile hanging long after he closed his door. Touching my teacup, I felt as though my skin had come alive once more as I headed to the kitchen shaking hands. One Saturday afternoon it happened once more. Reading a novel on the couch, I was wrapped up when he came with his camera. He said the light in the room was quite beautiful. I nodded, thinking he would start firing the glass or shelves. He raised the prism instead to me. I halted. "If you're uncomfortable, I could stop gently," he said. I shook my head. "No, it's fine." I'm not clear what it took to say yes. Maybe it was his approach, not with entitlement but with respect, as if he thought I was beautiful, as though he was afraid of breaking the moment with too tremendous fervor. He took pictures of me reading, of my fingers gripping the page, of the line my neck made, of the way my hair flowed over one shoulder. Never have I experienced such clear awareness. Our eyes met when he lowered the camera. Not one of us started moving. Between us, the air got electric. Still, the type of quiet that produces heart pounding is different. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "You have the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you." Not sure what to say. I grinned and turned away. But within of me, something changed. Later that evening, I came into his images on the shared desktop folder. He hadn't kept them under cover. Their tags are Light Studies, Samantha. I opened another, then one more. Every image seemed to be a love letter I had not been brave enough to open. Not dramatic, nor seductive, only real. The curve of my cheek, the sensitivity in my gaze, my silence. I sat there looking at them and felt my breath stop in my throat, as I hadn't looked lonely for the past several years. I gazed beloved, even if I was not, even if I was only being photographed. Then showed there on Tuesday early. Barefoot in my robe, I was back in the kitchen once more, hair in a bun, still smelling coffee. He came in. I spun around, but I felt him behind me. So near I could hear his soft breathing. His voice low, he asked, "Can I help with that?" He had not mentioned the mug I carried. I turned to look at him slowly. We spaced inches apart. Before anything almost frightened and defenseless, I had not seen in his gaze. Then his hand passed over mine. It burned through me, the least touch. We held still. Two people on the brink of a choice stood there. He did not produce. He did not retreat. He mostly waited. And I did what I have done many times during my life. I withdraw. I pulled back my hand, said something about laundry, and turned away. I couldn't stop shaking, though, as I folded papers in the other room, knowing deep down that was the first time someone had asked to touch me. Not hands, but with presence instead. The house shifted from that point on to something else. Not home, not protection, but liminal. That space between before and after. We still sipped tea, kept running over one another, and pretended nothing had occurred. Both of us knew, nevertheless, that had, and waiting loomed between us now as well. When two people's silence starts to seem louder than their speech, what should one do? Should this story enthrall you, make sure you like this video, follow this channel, and set on alarms. Your waiting for still has to come. That evening I stayed from sleep. Counting the intervals between the rain banging on the windows, I turned to look at the ceiling. Every time the old pipes creased or a floorboard moved, I imagined it as his feet once more roaming the corridor. Still, he did not turn up, and I hated the degree to which that disappointed me. We moved around one another like shadows in the coming days. Our gaze stretched longer, our sentences were brief. I started to note his absences over his presence. From the guest room, I missed his subdued buzz of music, his lingering in the kitchen, even his scent trail following his pass-by. He seemed to have retreated, hesitant to breach a line I hadn't defined but hadn't erased either. I persuaded myself this was good, that the space was quite vital. But I lied to myself, since every night when I heard the faint click of his bedroom door, my own fingers tightened in my covers. Then arrived the morning that turned things around. I had nodded off wearing one of his t-shirts. Since it ended up in my laundry, I had kept it. Told myself it was only familiar and soft. Half asleep, I rolled over and there he was, standing at my doorway, sporting nothing but drawstring trousers, hair matted, sleep still in his eyes. The floor of the corridor squeaking woke me. We fixed long looks at each other. He said nothing. He moved nowhere, and neither did I. Something about the early light gave the moment weightlessness, as though time had let go. Then he went forward one slow, careful foot at a time, as though he were approaching something holy. Avoiding touching me, he sat on the edge of my bed and inquired not at all. He just looked at me. "Are you scared?" he said. I could have nodded to say yes. I could have insisted on him going, but I answered, "No," gently instead. I began to migrate over then. It was the smallest change, just enough for him to lie next to me, not under, not over me, merely with me. We laid in silence, our breaths like a smooth wave matching gradually. My back to his chest, his hand settles softly on my waist at last. He merely held me, not like a guy asserting rights, but rather like someone who had waited patiently to be let this close. He made no attempt to pilfer anything from me, and in that silence, I felt something breaking inside me. Years of silence, invisibility, of tucking myself into corners to avoid too much, all slid away as he drew me in. Just his breath against the back of my neck, his fingers encircling mine. No words, no justification. Love, I thought, had to be loud, that it broke things, that it arrived dressed in drama and pronouncements. But this was consistent, honest, and mild. He hardly there, like a secret, kissed behind my ear. And for the first time in rather long ago, I felt safe in someone's arms. Not because he promised anything, but rather since he had not promised at all. He just showed up least expected, of course, and most needed, of course. We stayed like that until the sun rose fully. Only breath and warmth and a sort of calm I never wanted to leave. There are no alarms or phones, and I knew at that very moment everything had changed irreversibly. He was not just my renter. The first man I had let stay had seen me only once in years. Have you ever let someone in, silently instead of kissing? If this section of the story speaks to you, maybe share and subscribe. The following part is where everything beautiful starts to feel dangerous. When I woke once more, he had vanished. From his side of the bed, the sheets dented where his body had been. The bed stayed pleasant, and I wasn't sure if, for a little instant, I had dreamed it. Then, though, I saw a cup on my nightstand. Mine, but flavored precisely as I want with tea. He had done it before he left. Just quiet and memories, without words, without notes, without knock. I sat up, and right away the air around me looked heavy. Based on what I had done, what I felt was not regret. Not exactly, but it was something nearly here. Something tighter in my chest, something that shouted, "This changes everything." Because it had. Because this house seems different everywhere these days. The corridor, the kitchen, my tightening of my robe as I passed his door. Even my movement felt unusual, as though I were trying to disguise it, or maybe prevent disturbing something holy. Later that afternoon, I found him focused as though it were just another day in the backyard, camera in hand. He looked up and gave a very gentle smile, almost half split as I left. "Hey," he said, as nothing had changed. That is, as we hadn't just shared a bed, a breath, 1,000 unspoken things. I nodded in opposition. "Hey." Then we stood there behaving as though the interval separating us was just another minute. Still, it was not quite like. We both knew something about that. That evening I went to try writing. Fingers hovering above the keyboard, I sat at my desk, but the words would not come out. How could I focus on fiction with the screaming truth in my chest? His eyes in the dark, the way his fingers had fit between mine, the way he hadn't tried to possess me, but rather asked if I was afraid kept me seeing. And I had turned down too. Why had my response been a negative one? Why had I not insisted on his leaving? I stopped more than once in the corridor that evening at his door. My hand hung above the knob, then dropped. More worried about what it suggested I desired than about what would happen if I knocked. How had things turned out this way? He was only a tenant, a stranger once, a young man carrying a camera and a backpack with a lovely voice 12 years younger. Still, he had touched something different in me none else had. Not motivated by passion, but by presence. More dangerous than all else, was it? That evening, I also failed to fall asleep. Instead, I lie there thinking about the quick changes a life could experience. One moment, one choice may make everything else seem to be a lie. I thought of the world beyond this house, the rules, the evaluation, the weight of how things ought to look. About my own reflection, about the delicate wrinkles around my mouth, about the gray around my temples, about the way he stared at me like none of that counted. and I hated how much I yearned for that attention since it made me feel new, alive, wanted. And it made me feel terrible in ways I never understood how to manage. The next morning I skipped him. I left early, sat in a cafe working on paper I couldn't even read for hours. When I returned, he was not at home. His door closed tightly as I passed it. We had messed something out here. Still living under the same roof, we were bleeding gently behind walls, still hearing one another's footsteps, but no more bold enough to meet each other's eyes. That morning we had even traded wonderful, modest even. But since it wasn't over, it resonated more agonizingly than any farewell in its quiet now. It was louder than any quarrel. It was only beginning. I also frelled under what might follow, petrified he might never find his way back to my bed. Still more frightened, though, that he could. Have you ever shared something beautiful only to find terrible resonance later? If this story speaks to you, gently hit the like button, sign up for this channel, forward it to someone who will understand, and keep tuned. Healing begins in the last act. Hearts shatter here. 3 lengthy echoes of days passed. He stayed out more often, came home late, not stayed in the kitchen, never asked about my daily calendar, missed not knocking on my door, and I passed over knocking on his. More because I didn't know what I would say, not because I didn't want to. I had not the words for what we were now, for what that morning meant, for what it broke, or for what it opened. Once more the house was cold, in spirit rather than in degrees Celsius. The quiet becomes sharp, not soothing, like strolling barefoot across splinters. I lost his voice in the hall. I missed his chuckling on his phone at something. I missed that little mug he left just barely rinsed on the sink's edge. I missed his nearliness, his vitality, his presence. I also hated myself for wanting it since, after my last heartache, I had promised myself not to let anyone else control the rhythm of my life once more. But Liam had, without trying, without asking. And here I was in the middle of my kitchen making tea for one, learning how hollow independence might feel. That evening the rain came down. Not the soft kind, the sort that reminds you the world outside is still alive even if you have gone silent inside and sounds like 1,000 small hands tapping the windows. Slung in a blanket, I sat close to the window and peered out at the blurry world. Then I heard footsteps, the front door cracking. His measured, just beyond the living room steps. I stayed from turning. I murmured, "Liam." He followed me for a moment before I felt his proximity. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he murmured, and it set something large in my chest ablaze. I turned then and caught his eye. I added, "I have no idea what to do with this." He nodded as well, moving nearer. "You only have to want. You don't have to know." I gazed at him, this young man with eyes too knowing for his age, this lad who had fallen into my life and somehow discovered a room inside my heart I knew didn't exist. "I'm afraid," I said with trembling voice, "of what people will think, of losing what we had, of wanting something I shouldn't." He bent softly, intentionally in front of me. "Then let me carry the fear with you," he said. "Not for you, with you." That evening I didn't kiss him. Rather, I grasped his hand, put it to my chest, let him experience the speed with which my heart was pounding, from relief rather than from lust or from guilt. I wasn't carrying my loneliness alone, for the first time in years, and he was not a mistake. This modest, spiritual renter. He was a mirror, one that didn't criticize the years I'd lived, the lines on my face, or the cracks I still hadn't filled. He stayed after seeing me exactly as I was. Weeks went by, Then we started gently once more. Quiet mornings spent drinking tea on the porch. Quiet evenings when our bodies found each other in tranquility rather than desperation. We left out definition of it. We never gave it a name. We just went through it. And I silently said thank you in my heart each time I glanced at him. Not for saving me, but for reminding me that it's okay to yearn for love once more. To pick it. Even when it comes packaged in questions. Not even when it seems nothing like the tales you were given. I so ask you, would you have the bravery to listen if your heart whispered what it needed? Not loudly, not with fireworks, in a quiet, quivering voice. Because occasionally, the love you discover late in life is the one that at last feels like home. Let this narrative carry on if it touched your heart. Click the like button. Share it with someone that has to hear it. Remember also that you should subscribe for more soulful stories. Love just has timing. It has no age or guidelines.